I think what's rough is that we're missing out on a lot, that things we don't even know we're missing out on per se. Like, we're going to think back to our first day of college classes. I don't remember it.
Being a freshman during COVID.
It's like you're sitting in a candy store and you see all the candy around you, but you can't get it yet because it's a glass panel in front of you. You're not allowed to go and just do everything you want and everything you've dreamed of in the 4 years of high school and the way college has been depicted in every single movie and TV show you've seen.
The biggest difference is the lack of tradition that other students got.
So it's just kind of a lot of speculation about what it's supposed to be like.
Just hearing about these things that happen that just aren't happening, I'm like, oh, that would be so much fun. And it's like every day there's something that's like, oh, that would be so cool.
I feel like it makes it better for us that we don't know what the college experience is like normally.
Hi, my name is Kelsey McAlister and I'm a freshman here at the College of William & Mary. I work in the Studio for Teaching and Learning Innovation, and this semester I was tasked with creating a documentary about the student experience during COVID-19. As I got farther along though, I really decided to hone in specifically on the freshman experience, because not only did these freshmen lose the end of their high school careers, but they're also being challenged with making one of the most difficult transitions during a global pandemic. And as you'll soon hear, this isn't easy. So to whoever you are watching this right now, I hope that you leave this documentary with at least one new perspective about what it's like to learn in this environment. Because we all know that an online class is not going to compare to an in-person one. But these freshmen brought so much more to the table. They were so vulnerable and brought so many unique perspectives that there's a lot that can be learned. So without further ado, here is a freshman experience during COVID-19.
I chose William & Mary because I was looking for a somewhat smaller school with a more tight-knit community, with a very strong academic program overall, and a focus on the liberal arts.
I realized that it'd be really difficult for me to study at home based on my family situation. So I was excited to know that I could have kind of a refuge for learning and education and have a community where everyone would be focused on just bettering themselves when it comes to whatever they want to major in.
I think the biggest things for me have been, there are various challenges to online learning. I absolutely understand that it's necessary and it's a great tool, but it's definitely a stand-in for the full in-person experience.
Academics have been rough. I feel like a lot of us, just from what I've been hearing from other people as well, we're really being slammed with work. I feel like some teachers think that this is an opportunity to give us more work because they're like, you're sitting on your computer all day, and I'm like, that's not a good thing. I'm noticing that I'm having a lot of issues retaining information. I will take notes for the sake of taking notes, but am I retaining anything? No.
It's just easier to learn and internalize that information when you're in a classroom setting with other people than when you're sitting at a computer alone in your room.
Honestly, it's just a lot of time management since a lot of our work is online and asynchronous. It's just kind of learning how to sit down and power through online lectures, textbook reading, that kind of thing. I think with the synchronous versus asynchronous, with synchronous classes, it's hard to be motivated to find a place to be on a Zoom call for an hour and 20 minutes or 50 minutes or however long the class is. With asynchronous classes, I've found it's easy to just, sit down and power through lectures. After this, I'm planning on going to swim and just spending 4 hours going through my microeconomics lectures.
I kind of forget what it's like to learn in the real classroom, but I can still recognize and remember that it's invaluable in comparison to an asynchronous class.
One just kind of random example, there was a chem exam I took recently that I didn't do as well on as I would have hoped. I think a big part of the reason for that is because of the online format we're using, you couldn't show your work for calculations, which is usually a huge part of kind of the points you get for questions on a chemistry exam. And there was discussion of using alternate methods, but there were cheating concerns if we used methods that would allow submitting calculations for various reasons. So while I obviously understand the necessity of that and everything, I think there's minor ultra specific things like that, all the way out to just high level things like it's just easier to learn and internalize that information when you're in a classroom setting with other people.
It's a little bit weird being in a classroom with all the desks being 6 feet apart. There's only 30 of us in this giant lecture hall. But honestly, I'm just happy to have at least one class in person that I can be face-to-face with the professor, face-to-face with my classmates. So it's definitely a nice thing to have in my week.
They've changed the room layout so that it can actually accommodate all of us. But it's definitely a little different than Zoom. I actually haven't gotten to know that professor as well as I thought I would, just being in person. And I think he's the professor that I think I know the least.
It's definitely harder. I think conversations and one-on-ones are less often. Office hours aren't really there. I mean, you can go to a Zoom call and talk to them, but you don't really get the chance to meet, interact, give them a handshake, and really understand them.
And we were talking in my hall about how funny it is that you read all these reports that are don't sit and stare at a computer all day, and it's we have no other option at the moment. I don't work in my room. I can't. I can't work next to where I sleep. So I'm rotating between the main lounge, the corner lounge, outside the dorm, ISC, SWAC. So that does help. I'm glad that those places are open. But the Zoom fatigue is real because I catch myself just zoning out of the call. And it's difficult to pay attention. It really is. It doesn't feel like I'm in class. I will say that my grades right now are not looking amazing, which is a little worrying because everyone's telling me you're a first semester freshman in the middle of the pandemic, it's okay. But I'm how okay really is it? In person, I feel they can see my effort more. Whereas online, they see my grade. And for example, I had a homework assignment where I got a 20% and I spent 2.5 hours on it. And so I really put in the effort. I did explain to my teacher, I was I'm putting in the effort, And it's I understand why it looks like I'm not, because 20% in a homework is, I feel that's, that's not good. And then I did put in the effort, and it's that disconnect I think is stronger.
So my in-person call class, it's really nice just having something in person because we actually a little bit more than half the class went to get lunch together the other day, just because that's the only class that I feel like I have a pretty good bond with, people-wise, because we can just all have that general rapport, just be oh, how was your day? Oh, this is what happened. This is something interesting, and just have a nice back and forth because we're in person and just see each other. I will say though that I do like my data science class being asynchronous. I feel that one actually worked out really, really well in that format, and I feel it should kind of stay that way even when things go back to normal. I hope that the optimism and resilience of these freshmen are already jumping out to you just as much as they've jumped out to me. As you probably have realized, learning online really just depends on what your specific learning style is. So just like Adam, I really like my asynchronous classes a lot more than I thought I would. I love being able to take the class when I want to, how I want to, where I want to, instead of having to schedule it into my day. For me, it's really weird just how normal it's become to learn online. So for instance, I really hate now waking up 20 minutes earlier to get dressed and walk across campus for my in-person class, when just a year ago, that was the complete norm for learning anywhere. So it's really just interesting to kind of reflect back, and kind of scary also, to realize just how normal online classes have become. Next, we're going to take a trip down memory lane over a century ago. Whereas most colleges are experiencing a pandemic for the first time this year, the College of William & Mary has already experienced a pandemic in its history. In 1918, the Spanish flu swept across the nation, and the College of William & Mary was forced to quarantine their students for 10 days. That year, freshmen were the only new students here on campus. 1918 was also the first year that the college went coeducational. One of their female students, Martha Barksdale, kept a diary during her experience here at the College of William & Mary, and you'll soon hear what it was like for her to quarantine during those 10 days and how it helped her integrate into the college experience.
As the second oldest institution of higher learning in the nation, this is not the first time that the college has experienced a pandemic. The college first became co-ed in 1918, the same year that the nation experienced the wave of the Spanish influenza. Classes were canceled and students were quarantined in the residential halls for 10 days before resuming activity. Mary Barksdale was in this cohort of the first girls to attend the college, and she kept a diary filled with her experiences. Some of the first pages share her experience during her quarantine period in their dormitory, Tyler Hall, and how it bonded the girls together while leaving the men to wonder about the girls in the dorm across the way. An excerpt from her diary reads, "I arrived here on September 19th and came up in an automobile with Rush Conkey and Celeste Ross. After several days, we got straight and had classes one day before we were quarantined for Spanish influenza. This was a good thing for us. None of the girls had it, so we used our time in getting well acquainted. We had met none of the boys, and the quarantine served to make them want to meet us. Soon after the quarantine, the lieutenants and a few non-coms came over one night. This started our social hour. Since then, the boys came over every night after supper until call to quarters, or on Saturday and Sunday until 10.
One of the big differences between Martha's story and the freshmen this year is that the boys really became interested in the girls as they were separated with quarantine. That was not the same for the freshmen. In fact, it was probably the opposite. In order to smooth the transition into a college experience during a pandemic, the college welcomed its freshmen back 3 weeks earlier than the rest of the student population. During those 3 weeks, the freshmen were able to build some sort of a community, but as those 3 weeks came to a close, it was really interesting seeing a bunch of new kids here that you weren't really used to having before. But that brings the next question. How do you build a community during a pandemic? How do you make friends? How do you build that community when there's so many restrictions in place? Next, we're going to hear from these students on their experience with making friends.
That's a great question. So how did I meet people outside of my dorm? So obviously orientation was spent just with guys in my dorm. And then after that, it was honestly just through different clubs and organizations that I would try out once or twice. I tried out InterVarsity, Christian Fellowship, and I met a few people through that, and then just kind of met their friends, and it's a lot of like mutual friends meeting and that kind of thing. So it eventually I've kind of made a good amount of friends, but it's just been through like weird connections.
Like I mentioned earlier, I'm not big on getting out and like meeting people just because I have that introvert personality. And that first week of like orientation and everything, I spent like almost every second of the day like in our lounge so that I could meet people. And so I probably got to know all of my hallmates before like anyone else. And I made an effort to like introduce myself to everyone, and that's just not something I would have done before.
Because of COVID, there were some group chats and stuff that everybody was talking on beforehand. And so I ended up like kind of getting to know a lot of people through that and then meeting up with them in real life.
So I just made the mock trial team last week, and actually William & Mary mock trial has like the sportsmanship award of like the country. So they're a really, really tight, close-knit family of support, and just seeing them interact on Zoom, I've never seen anyone interact like so freely. I mean, they make it work, but it's weird coming in as an outsider, and I wish it could be in person, just because I think it's going to be really, like, there's going to be that roadblock to connection just because we're on a laptop.
Honestly, as hard as it was the first couple weeks to make friends, just because of, restrictions during orientation and kind of, having to wear masks so you don't really recognize people right away when you walk past them. Just kind of the mentality that we're all in this together, we're all kind of keeping each other accountable. I feel like it's been really good for my friendships and for my friend groups. Just kind of all having the sense of community around the fact that yes, the situation sucks, but the fact that we're just here at all is amazing. The fact that we can even, be in a college experience, because, I'm from Massachusetts, and so almost every college up there is online. And so just kind of being able to be down here and actually be on campus and meeting new people, professors, upperclassmen, it's been easier than I thought, especially in the last few weeks now that we're kind of settled a little bit and there isn't as much of a fear as going home. I feel like the college experience is becoming a little bit more normal, even though we have masks and social distancing and stuff.
At the end there, Adam mentioned something that has been on a lot of students' minds this entire semester, this fear of being sent home. What is the college doing to make sure that we can stay on this campus learning in Williamsburg, Virginia? Obviously, this all starts from the top down. The administration makes regulations and we have to follow them. The college has repetitively said they don't want us to stay socially distanced. They want us to remain physically distanced, but socially together. Is this possible, though, with all these restrictions in place? When you can't go into other residential halls or have a lot of in-person classes, how are students able to build that community? Next, we're going to hear from these students on COVID restrictions and how they see them playing out around campus. Is it really impeding their ability to make that community that William & Mary prides itself on?
I think that the ultra-specific rules are very well intentioned, but I don't know that all of them achieve what they intend to.
At first, I honestly didn't think it was gonna last that long. And so it was a few weeks before college and I realized this is really happening. And so it was a lot of just reading the rules, literally just reading all the emails they were sending about how it's gonna be.
I think that it was difficult at first because it was relatively clear from the students' perspective. As someone who got here on the first day at one of the earliest move-in times, it didn't feel like they really knew what they were doing, which also, to be fair, no other college really knew what they were doing. This is unprecedented territory, but it was weird to not see any adults on campus. The only adults in the dining halls were the contracted dining service workers. And also, I don't think they were really given any regulations, so it's really confusing for all of us.
I think it's a pick and choose type situation. So you can have students sitting 6 feet apart, cleaning your desk before classrooms, but you still allow them to eat unsocially distant in the dining halls. You can enforce strict rules about wearing masks in public spaces, but then anyone goes off campus and in Colonial Williamsburg and it's a free-for-all. It's not consistent.
For example, back at my hall, there is a rule, I believe, that there can only be 4 people in the main lobby. The main lobby is a pretty large space and should be able to have more than that while maintaining 6-foot distance. My concern is that by banning groups of more than 4 people in a large, relatively open space that, as far as indoor spaces go, should be fairly low risk, they're going to push people into more high-risk scenarios, like people over-indexing the limit on being in their own rooms with guests, in ways that are actually more likely to result in a dangerous scenario. Like, people are more likely to take masks off when they're in private rooms than in the lobby, stuff like that.
I think it's probably a little stricter than I thought it would be, to be honest.
And it was a bit frustrating to see that initial email sent out, which basically just berated us as students for not obeying the rules, which I think were a little loosely set out. Over time, they did become more structured, and I think that we started to learn what we were supposed to do and what we weren't supposed to do. But at first, it was a little difficult.
But I definitely think there's kind of a constant sense of kind of being in fear over the situation. And obviously we are all doing, or the vast majority of us are doing the best we can to wear masks, socially distance, just behave in all the correct, responsible ways. But I think there is a very strong recognition of the fact that it is a precarious situation. It only takes a few people who aren't following the proper guidelines to start an outbreak that could spread and potentially cause deaths and serious illnesses among many on the campus.
I would say give us the benefit of the doubt in these situations. There are some students who are gonna not social distance and party or whatever, but for the most part, we take our health and we take our bodies seriously. So I think giving us the opportunity to show ourselves true and allow us to do the best possible. So put us in the situation to make the best decision.
And then looking forward, I hope the administration is a lot more wary about their frontline workers.
I think that they're definitely trying very hard with a lot of these rules, and I appreciate that effort, but I think some of it may perhaps backfire or be counterproductive in unanticipated ways.
Just as Evan said, We all know that these COVID regulations are necessary to keep us safe and healthy here on campus, but that doesn't mean that it's not impeding our ability to make that community that all of us so badly wanted to build here at the college. Now, before we get to the final question of what it's really like to be a freshman during COVID-19, we're going to take a sidestep and go down to SWEM to their special collections and see how they're documenting this historic moment.
In April of 2020, the archivist at UNC Charlotte sent an idea and sample submission form to the Society of National Archivists as a way to collect civilians' experiences during the global pandemic. I sat down and talked to Alyssa Zawowski, one of William & Mary's own archivists, and she told me how William & Mary has implemented this project here on our campus to document students, faculty, alumni, and Williamsburg community members' experience during this global pandemic.
A lot of different colleges and organizations have similar projects that they've been doing this year in order to capture people's feelings about the pandemic as it was happening. And in March, the University Archivist at UNC Charlotte, Katie Howell, sent out to the Society of American Archivists listserv this Google form that her department had created to be an easy way for students to submit their journals, diaries, first impressions, and this was a student employment project for them. And we partly used it as for student employment as well, just because we're trying to help keep folks busy when we were home for a very long time. But it turned out to be a really meaningful way to engage with the community as well. So it's we didn't want to talk to just students, but also we reached out to alumni, folks in the Williamsburg region, and it became a nice way for people to sort of give us a snapshot of their daily lives. We've received a ton of cool stuff, and we re-pushed it out recently just because a lot of students weren't here when we did it the first time, and we thought they might want to contribute. And I know there's a lot going on, so we wanted to get it in their minds before they went home for break. We also accept physical submissions too. I don't think we have any at the moment, but if people made something by hand and they want to send it to us, that's definitely acceptable. And those will be available in the archives when we're allowed to have folks come back and see them. I think there have been efforts to get different student organizations to share their experiences here. They're always the tricky one, because if you think about what most archives have, we have a ton of yearbooks, we have a lot of scrapbooks from various other decades, but more recent stuff, it's not necessarily in people's minds to even think of us or that we're interested. So periodically we do have to sort of try new things to get people's attention. But this pandemic hopefully will be the only one we ever have. So as long as people are inspired to share their thoughts and feelings about that, we'll take them.
And finally, the question that sparked this documentary in the first place. What's it like to be a freshman during COVID-19? Being a freshman during COVID?
Like, there's aspects that suck.
You feel like everything's open because you're in school, and there's not really, and there are restrictions for things, but it's just like, there's just different activities. But then it's like you go, whenever you step into the real world, like if you ever like go home and see your parents, and it's like, oh, you're just reminded COVID is still here in full force and everything.
There is a very strong recognition of the fact that it is a precarious situation. It only takes a few people who aren't following the proper guidelines to start an outbreak that could spread and potentially cause deaths and serious illnesses among many on the campus.
I don't know, I feel like there's an expectation of us to act like everything is normal. Like, I feel like on one hand, we're expected to understand that the teachers are going to have a rougher time. Understandably, because teaching over Zoom is rough. Like, as hard as it is learning over Zoom, teaching over Zoom must be also rough. But I feel like there's still a higher expectation for us to just accept it and roll with it, which is really difficult to do because most of us do not work well this way. And I feel like there's somewhat of a disconnect in terms of understanding how not only are we still transitioning, because that's already one thing, but the pandemic is still a thing. And it really does impact your day-to-day.
It's really like, it's a little bit daunting at times to be here and know that things could be going on but they aren't. But then having the restraint and the ability to like step back and say this is for the best This is for our health, for everyone's health, and for the well-being of the world itself.
I feel like I'm in kind of like a limbo phase where it's like I'm a freshman, but COVID is taking away from that. So like how much freshman year stuff am I getting, you know what I mean?
Like we don't really know what it's supposed to be like, and so I guess this is just kind of how it is for us.
We're doing the best as possible, but trying to maintain some sense of normality.
The simplest thing is I feel like there's so many things that campus has in general that because they're over Zoom that just aren't really as appealing, because after Zoom classes you just kind of want to give a little break.
It's definitely harder to meet people than I thought it would be. I thought I would make friends, but with everything being on Zoom, that's been a little different, a little more isolating. The workload probably like from my perception, probably more than normal. And so I'm just wondering what it's going to be like once things do return to normal, if it's going to seem easier or if it's going to seem, I don't know, kind of the same.
I feel very clean. I think there's a negative to having to wash your hands every single time and sanitize, but I think we've never had a cleaner dining hall. We've never had a more sanitary library, and I think that is not going to stop after COVID ends. I think being safe and clean and careful around shared spaces is going to become the norm, which is a good thing.
I think one thing to definitely make it, just make it through all of this is just to make an effort to go out and do things with people. Because I know especially for me, it's just like already being an introvert, that's not something that comes natural to me. And then with the pandemic on top of it and all the quarantine and all of that, it's just, like I said, it's been harder to meet people, and so I've had to make an extra effort to do that. But it definitely helps it not feel as isolated, and you remind yourself that, you know, everyone else is going through this too. They're all having the same problems.
I feel like because I was so tired from not having social interaction like over quarantine, I feel like I'm definitely more open to just trying different things like here. Like whether it's just like going to Wawa at midnight or just staying up to like 3 a.m. at Sunken Gardens, I just kind of feel like I'm just like ready for like any opportunity that just kind of comes my way now, because I'm like, every moment is precious.
I wish it wasn't this way, but I'm just glad that I'm here on campus. And it's honestly, you know, I don't want to go home. Like, I'm glad I'm here. This is where I want to be.
Yeah, I really thought about taking a year off, doing a gap year in another country, but I think that college is something that I get to experience one time in my life. This is going to be the prime. This is the opportunity for me to be the best version of myself. I think William & Mary here gives me the best opportunity, even with COVID and with these restrictions in place.
There you have it, the freshman experience from all over campus and from all different social groups. From academics to making friends and to COVID restrictions, this pandemic is taking a toll on every student here on campus. But in this trying time, we've all learned that we have to try new things. So whether it's a professor is trying out new methods of teaching, or students trying out new ways to socialize in this pandemic-ridden era, we're all learning what we can do differently while still maintaining a sense of normalcy. Whoever you are that has made it this far, I want to thank you, and I really hope that you can take whatever you've learned from this documentary to whatever area of life that you are experiencing this pandemic in. And a special thank you to all the freshmen who volunteered their time to be in this documentary. It literally could not have been done without you. And also a thank you to everyone who has supported and given feedback on this documentary. Stay safe and stay healthy.